The night Nolan Webb walked into Hargrove and Sons Fine Violins on West 46th Street, he was carrying two things: a cracked instrument case held shut with a bungee cord, and 3 days of hunger that had started to feel like a permanent condition. He had been standing outside the shop for 20 minutes. November in Manhattan does not negotiate. The wind off the Hudson had worked its way through the seams of his jacket sometime around the first hour of walking, and now it lived there, settled in against his ribs. He watched through the window the way he had been watching through windows his whole life. Warm light on old wood, glass cases holding violins that cost more than some people's cars. A man in a charcoal vest moving between display stands with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once had to check a price tag before picking something up. Nolan was 22 years old. He had aged out of the foster system 4 years ago, which in practical terms meant that the city had handed him a bus pass and a list of shelters and wished him luck. He had a violin that had belonged to his grandmother. He had a gift that his grandmother had spent 11 years building in him before she died. He had no place to sleep tonight that was not the back corner of a Port Authority waiting room. He pushed the door open. The brass chime above the entrance was delicate, almost inaudible, the kind of sound that belonged in a place like this. Conversations did not stop. They thinned. The two men at the back counter looked up from whatever they were discussing. A younger man restocking a glass case near the window turned and then looked again the way people do when they are deciding whether what they are seeing is a problem. Nolan took 2 steps onto the hardwood floor. He was aware of his sneakers. He was aware of his jacket. He was aware, in the way that you become aware of your own body when a room full of strangers starts deciding what you are, of every inch of himself that did not belong here. The man in the charcoal vest came forward. He was older, maybe 60, with the kind of face that had settled into a permanent mild skepticism. His name tag read Dale Coburn, and below that, manager. "Can I help you?" The words were correct. The tone was a door held open just wide enough to ask what you wanted before deciding whether to let you through. Nolan's grip tightened on the instrument case. "I was hoping," he said. And then he stopped and started again because he had practiced this on the walk over and it had sounded different in his head. "I noticed you have a sign in the window. Open auditions for the holiday ensemble. String section." Coburn's eyes moved to the case, the bungee cord, the cracked plastic at the hinge. "Those auditions are for contracted musicians," Coburn said. "Players we work with regularly. It is a private engagement for our clients. The sign says open." A beat of silence. The younger man by the window had stopped restocking. At the back counter, the second man, heavier, in a blue blazer, had turned fully around now. "Son," Coburn said with the gentle finality of a man closing a drawer, "I think perhaps you have the wrong impression of what I can play," Nolan said. "That is all I am asking." 5 minutes. The man in the blue blazer laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. That almost made it worse. It was the laugh of someone who found the situation mildly absurd, the way you laugh at a wrong turn, a misunderstanding, something that will make a fine story later at dinner. "Dale," the man said, "let him play." Coburn looked at the man in the blue blazer. Something passed between them, some agreed-upon joke that Nolan was not invited to understand. "Mr. Aldrich," Coburn said it like a warning. "Come on," Aldrich waved a hand. 5 minutes. "What is the harm?" Coburn stepped back from the door in a way that was not quite an invitation. Nolan walked to the open space in the center of the room. He set the case on the bench near the window. He unhooked the bungee cord. He opened the case. The violin inside was not the violin you would expect. It was old, yes, and it had been repaired twice at the neck, and the varnish along the lower bout had worn thin in the places where his grandmother's arm had rested against it for 40 years. But it was the kind of old that had a different quality from broken. It was the old of something used hard and cared for harder. He heard someone near the back make a small sound. He did not look up. He tightened the bow. He rosined it. He lifted the violin to his shoulder and settled it the way his grandmother had taught him. Chin down, left elbow forward, weight balanced. He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds, which is what she had always told him to do. 3 seconds, she said, to remember why you are playing and for whom. He opened his eyes and drew the bow. The first note he played was a low G, open string, no vibrato, just the instrument speaking. In a room full of expensive wood and careful acoustics, the sound moved differently than it would have in a practice room or a subway station. It bloomed. It opened up. Then he began. What he played was the chaconne. Bach's Partita No. 2 in D minor, the chaconne, 14 minutes of music that has broken musicians and made them at the same time for 300 years. He did not play all 14 minutes. He played the opening section and part of the central major variation, and he played it the way his grandmother had played it, which was not the way they taught it at conservatories, not the polished, measured approach of someone who had been trained to perform. He played it the way she had played everything, like it was a conversation she was having with something larger than herself, and she was not afraid to mean every word. He was 18 bars in when the sounds in the room stopped. Not the kind of stop where people hold still on purpose, the kind where they forget to keep moving. Coburn had folded his arms at the start. By bar 20, he had unfolded them. By the central variation, he was standing very still, with his hands at his sides, and his head tilted slightly the way people tilt their heads when something is reaching them that they did not give permission to reach them. Aldrich had set down the glass he was holding. The young man by the window had sat down on the floor. Nolan played through to the end of the major variation and let the last chord breathe out until the room absorbed it completely. Then he lowered the bow. Nobody spoke. "Where?" Coburn said finally, and his voice had changed in a way he probably had not intended anyone to notice. "Did you study? My grandmother taught me before that. There was no before that." Coburn looked at him. "No conservatory? No teacher besides her, no." Aldrich picked up his glass again. He was smiling, but it was the performance of a smile now. "Very nice," he said, genuinely. "But the holiday engagement requires ensemble experience, sight reading at tempo, and our clients expect—" "I sight read," Nolan said. "I play in any key. I have been playing chamber music since I was 9 years old. I am sure you have." Aldrich's voice had gone comfortable again, that same settled warmth that meant the decision was already made. "But you understand we have a standard. The musicians we use are professional players, union members, people with verifiable performance history. I am sure you can appreciate that we cannot simply—" "You advertised an open audition," Nolan said. The word open landed in the room with a weight Aldrich had not planned for. A woman's voice came from the doorway that led to the back workshop. "I heard the chaconne." She was in her 70s, white-haired, wearing a work apron over a blouse, carrying a luthier's plane in one hand, as though she had simply stepped out of what she was doing to follow the sound. Her name, Nolan would learn later, was Harriet Vance, and she had been restoring instruments in the workshop behind this shop for 38 years and had refused every offer to retire. She crossed the floor without hurry. She stopped in front of Nolan. She looked at his violin. "May I?" He held it out to her. She took it with the hands of someone who had touched 10,000 instruments. She turned it. She examined the neck repair. She looked at the interior through the F-holes. She played 2 notes, then set it gently back in Nolan's hands. "Meyercourt Workshop," she said. "Late 19th century. French. Someone has maintained this very carefully. My grandmother. Her name? Loretta Webb. She played with the Harlem Chamber Orchestra for 17 years. Something moved across Harriet's face. She looked at the violin again, then at Nolan. "Loretta Webb," she repeated slowly. "Yes, ma'am, I knew a Loretta Webb," Harriet said, not well. "But I heard her play once at a benefit in 1994 at the Schomburg Center." She paused. "I have never forgotten it." The room was quiet in a different way now. "Dale," Harriet said without looking at Coburn, "give this young man the audition he came for. Harriet, the proper one, with the music stand and the sight-reading sheets and the panel." She looked at him now. "The one you have been giving everybody else." The formal audition was scheduled for the following morning. Nolan spent that night on a bench in the 59th Street station, which was warmer than Port Authority, and had fewer people who would move him along. He had $7 and a half eaten granola bar and his violin case, which he used as a pillow with the bungee cord looped twice around his wrist while he slept. He was at the shop at 8:45. Harriet was already there. She let him in through the workshop entrance without saying much. She gave him a cup of coffee and a chair by the workbench and went back to what she had been doing, which was fitting a new bass bar into a viola that someone had dropped. She worked quietly. He drank the coffee and watched her hands. "You know what this wood is doing while I work on it?" she said after a while, not looking up. "No, ma'am. Oh, it remembers. Every instrument has a memory of the hands that have played it. You can hear it if you know what to listen for." She seated the bass bar and held the viola up to the light. "Your grandmother's violin has a very long memory." He did not answer. He looked at the case on the workbench. "She passed?" Harriet asked. "2 years ago." Harriet set the viola down. "I am sorry. She made me promise something before she did. She made me promise I would keep playing. Not for a living, necessarily. She wasn't romantic about that, but she said the music wasn't mine to stop." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "She said it had been passed to me the same way it was passed to her, and stopping it would be like dropping something that belonged to people who weren't around to pick it back up." Harriet looked at him over the rim of her glasses for a moment. "She sounds like she was a serious woman." "She was the most serious person I ever knew." The audition panel was 3 people: Coburn, a woman named Patricia Sue, who managed the ensemble bookings, and a violinist named David Marsh, who had been playing with Hargrove's groups for 15 years. They sat behind a folding table with score sheets and a recording device and the careful, neutral expressions of people who had agreed on something beforehand. Aldrich was not on the panel. He sat in a chair along the wall with his coat still on, which meant he had come to watch rather than to stay. Nolan sight-read 3 pieces. He played a prepared excerpt. He played scales at tempo in 4 keys. He answered questions about ensemble dynamics and bow technique and the specific demands of playing in a small acoustic room versus an amplified space. He knew he was good. He had always known he was good in the way that you know something that has been part of you so long, it stops feeling like a fact about yourself and starts feeling more like weather, simply present, simply true. What he did not know, standing in front of this panel in yesterday's clothes with the creases from a station bench still in his jacket, was whether good would be enough. Patricia Sue asked him to play the sight-reading excerpt a second time, slower. He did. She made a note. David Marsh asked him to demonstrate shifting in 3rd and 5th position on the G string. He did. Marsh watched his left hand the whole time without expression. At the end, Coburn said they would be in touch. Standard, closed. His face had returned to its default skepticism, the same face he'd had at the door the night before. Nolan packed his violin. He picked up his case. He said thank you and walked out. He sat on the front steps of a church on 45th Street for an hour. He was not praying. He was thinking about a kitchen on 132nd Street, and Lennox, his grandmother's kitchen, the one with the window that looked out on the back of another building, which she had called her garden view, unironically, because she said a little irony kept the soul from getting too heavy. The kitchen table was always pushed against the wall to make room. She needed the floor. That was where she had taught him, standing up, never sitting, because she said a body that played sitting down would never play the way a body played when it understood that music was physical, that it moved through you the same way blood moved through you, not by sitting still. He had been 6 the first time she placed the violin in his hands. He had been so frightened of dropping it that he hadn't moved his fingers at all for 5 full minutes. "Play it like you own it," she had said. "What if I break it? Then you broke it, but you won't." She'd put her hand over his on the neck. "You know how I know? Because it doesn't want to be broken. It wants to be played. That is what it was made for." He came back to the street. The church steps were cold through his jeans. He stood up. He had nowhere specific to be, which was a condition he had gotten practiced at filling. He went to the library on 42nd Street and played through scores in the music room for 3 hours. He ate the last granola bar. He thought about his grandmother's hands. On the 3rd day, Harriet called the number he had written on the audition form, which was a friend's number because he did not have a phone of his own. The friend texted him. He found a payphone. Harriet told him to come in. She was at her workbench when he arrived. She did not make him wait for the right moment or the right framing. "Dale is not offering you the engagement," she said. "He has decided to go with the players he used last year." Nolan stood in the doorway of the workshop. He had known this was likely. Knowing a thing is likely does not prepare you for the moment it becomes actual. "All right," he said. "No," Harriet said. "It is not all right." She set down the tool she was holding. "I have been in this shop for 38 years. I have watched this panel audition players for 38 years. I know what Dale hears and I know what he doesn't hear, and I know the difference between a decision made on musical grounds and a decision made on other grounds." She took off her glasses and set them on the workbench. "What he heard from you was the finest playing this room has seen in 10 years. What he decided, for the reasons he decided it, is a different matter entirely, Harriet." A voice from the doorway behind Nolan. He turned. Coburn was standing there. "I thought you were with a client," Harriet said. I came back." Coburn looked at Nolan, then at Harriet. "I heard the last part." "Good," Harriet said. "Then you heard me accurately." Coburn was quiet for a moment. He pressed his mouth together. He looked at the floor. He looked, briefly, like a man who was deciding something, and Nolan recognized the look because he had seen it on faces his whole life. That moment where the version of yourself you plan to be meets the version you actually turn out to be in the specific moment where it counts. "The Whitfield dinner," Coburn said. "Next Saturday, 4-piece ensemble, 2 hours. The scheduled first violin called this morning with a conflict." He did not look at Harriet. He looked at Nolan. "I am asking if you are available." The Whitfield dinner was a private event in a townhouse on East 70th Street. 40 guests in a dining room that had better acoustics than most performance halls Nolan had ever played in. He wore the one set of dark clothes he owned, which were clean because Harriet had quietly handed him an envelope on Thursday that she said was a consulting fee for helping her catalog some old inventory, and he had spent part of it at the laundromat. He arrived early. The other 3 musicians were already there. A cellist named Okafor, a violist named C.O. Yeon Park who went by Sonny, and a second violinist named James Whitfield who turned out to be the teenage son of the host and who was genuinely nervous and genuinely good. They ran through the program in the side hall. Nolan took the lead without discussing it because nobody offered an alternative and the music required someone to set the tempo and the decisions had to be made. Okafor and Sonny watched him during the run-through with the attentiveness of experienced players who were deciding whether to trust the person next to them. By the 3rd piece, they had decided. The dinner was long, and the music was good. Nolan watched the room the way his grandmother had taught him to watch a room, not the faces, which told you what people were willing to show you, but the bodies, which told you the truth. People stopped cutting their food during certain passages. A woman near the window closed her eyes. An older man in a navy blazer at the head table, who had been talking without stopping since they started, went quiet during the Bach. Afterward, the host, a man named Raymond Whitfield, came to shake hands. He had the handshake of someone who shook a lot of hands and had learned to make each one feel personal. "Outstanding," he said. "Genuinely outstanding. Dale Coburn should have put you in the program months ago." Nolan thanked him. He meant it without complication. The man at the head table in the navy blazer came over as Nolan was breaking down his stand. He was in his late 60s, lean, with the careful posture of someone who had played an instrument once and still carried it in his spine. "The Bach you played," the man said. "The prelude from the E major partita. You made a choice in the second half." "Yes, sir. A good choice. A choice I haven't heard anyone make since I heard Hilary Hahn play it in 2004. You took the dynamic down instead of up at the peak, and it made the whole thing suddenly about restraint." He looked at Nolan with the focused attention of someone who was not performing interest. "My name is Walter Bream. I am on the board of the New York String Foundation." He held out a card. Nolan took it. "I would like to hear you play again," Bream said. "Formally, with an audience." Nolan looked at the card. He looked at the man. He said, "I'll be in touch," which was the first time in his life he had said those words and meant them from a position of having something someone wanted. He did not tell Harriet about Bream right away. He told her about Whitmore. He told her the program went well, that Okafor was excellent, that Sunny Park had a sound that made the room larger. She listened the way she listened, which was completely, without offering her own thoughts until you were finished. Then she said, "Raymond Whitfield called Dale this morning. Nolan looked at her to say he wanted you at the spring benefit, by name. All right. Dale is going to call you today and offer you a contract." Nolan set his coffee cup on the workbench. He did not say anything. "I wanted you to know before he called," Harriet said, "so that you would have time to decide what you want from it before you are standing in his office deciding, 'What do you think I should want?'" She picked up her tools. "I think that is entirely your decision. I think you should take the morning and make it without me in the room." She went back to the instrument on her bench and then she said, without looking up, "But I will tell you something. I worked for this shop for 38 years believing that the work was enough, that if you were good enough, eventually the room made space for you." She made one careful pass with the scraper. "The room doesn't make space. The room fills itself with whatever fits most easily. You have to decide what you are asking for and ask for it out loud in the specific words, or you will get whatever is convenient." What happened next was not what Nolan had planned. He was in the small office on the second floor, the one with the framed prints of Stradivarius plates on the wall, waiting for Coburn to bring in the contract paperwork. He had come early. The appointment was at 11. It was 5 to. He was sitting in the chair across from the desk, and he could hear voices through the wall from the adjacent room, Coburn's office, and the wall was old and the voices were not quiet. He recognized Aldrich's voice first. "It does not need to be complicated," Aldrich was saying. "The optics are already there. Black kid from the system, plays at the Whitfield dinner. Whitfield loves him. We bring him in. Raymond runs in Raymond's circles. Raymond talks. We get 3 stories out of it minimum. The foundation announcement practically sells itself." Walter, Coburn's voice. "I am not saying it isn't also legitimate. He is good. That is not in question. But we have been trying to get back into the Whitfield orbit since the Castellano business, and this is a door. He is a musician we are hiring to play. He is a musician we are hiring to play, and a narrative that solves 2 problems at once." Aldrich's voice settled into something that was not unkind. "Exact, only efficient. I don't see why we need to pretend those 2 things aren't both true." Nolan sat in the chair. His hands were flat on his thighs. Through the wall, Coburn said something he could not quite hear, and Aldrich said, "Just the way it is." And Coburn said, "I know." He sat there for a long time after the voices moved on. His grandmother's kitchen came back to him. Her standing at the window, looking at the back of the other building she called her garden view. He had asked her once, when he was maybe 12, whether she ever got tired of being the story people told about her. Because even then, even at 12, he had noticed the way certain rooms received her, the way certain people talked about her at events. The first black woman in this orchestra, one of the few black women in that chamber ensemble, always preceded by something she had not asked to be preceded by. She had thought about it for a long time before she answered, which was what she always did with the questions that deserved it. "The story is not the same as you," she had finally said. "People will tell the story they need. You can let that eat you, or you can let it be what it is, something that happens around you that has nothing to do with what you are actually doing." "What are you actually doing?" "Playing the music," she said. "That is the only part that belongs to me." He looked at his hands on his thighs. He stood up. He picked up his violin case. He walked down the stairs. He went through the workshop where Harriet looked up from her bench. She saw his face. She set down her tool. "Nolan, I need to tell you something." He told her what he had heard. All of it, straight through, without editing. She listened with her hands at her sides. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You heard something you shouldn't have heard." "Yes, and it is true. I know it is true." She looked at him. She did not try to explain it or soften it. She was one of the people in that conversation, was the thing, and they both knew it, and she did not pretend otherwise. "I don't know what to do with it," Nolan said. "I keep trying to work out whether it matters. Whether it changes what the work is. Does it? He thought about his grandmother. The story is not the same as you. No, he said, but I am not interested in being a door. She nodded once. What do you want? She said. He thought about it. He thought about what she had told him that morning. Ask for it out loud in the specific words. I want to play, he said. I want a real contract, a professional rate, ensemble credit in the program, and I want my grandmother listed in the program notes. Not as a story, just her name and her years with the Harlem Chamber Orchestra, because she should be in the room too. He picked up the case. If those are the terms, I will sign. If they want the other version, the narrative version, they can find someone else. Harriet looked at him for a long moment. Those are very clear terms, she said. Yes, ma'am. I will take them to Dale myself. She picked up her glasses from the bench. Go get some breakfast. Don't come back for 2 hours. He went to a diner on 9th Avenue and ate a full meal for the first time in 4 days. He sat at the counter with his violin case on the stool beside him and drank 2 cups of coffee and ate eggs and toast, and did not think about the outcome, because he had spent enough of his life thinking about outcomes he could not control. He thought instead about his grandmother playing in her kitchen, bow flying, her foot marking the pulse on the linoleum floor. He thought about the way she had stopped one afternoon in the middle of a passage, lowered the violin, and said to him, out of nowhere, when you play like nobody is deciding whether to let you, that is when you play like yourself. Then she'd picked up the bow and started again from the beginning. The phone rang at Harriet's workshop at noon. She answered it. She listened. She said 3 words and hung up. When Nolan came back at 1, she was at her bench working. She did not look up right away. Your terms, she said, were accepted. All of them. He stood in the doorway of the workshop. The program note, he said. Your grandmother's name, her years with the orchestra, under your biography. He set the case down on the nearest surface. He stood very still for a moment. The workshop smelled of rosin and old wood and the linseed oil Harriet used on her tools. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, Harriet said. Those were your words. I just carried them. The spring benefit was held in the grand ballroom of a hotel on Park Avenue. 200 guests. A program printed on heavy cream paper. The ensemble was 5 pieces now, Nolan leading. He stood in the green room before they went on, holding his grandmother's violin by the neck, the way you hold something that is both yours and not yours. The other musicians were tuning, talking, adjusting. He read the program note once. He did not read it again. Loretta Webb, 1944 to 2022. First violinist, Harlem Chamber Orchestra, 1971-1988. Grandmother and teacher of Nolan Webb. He had not cried when she died. He had been too practical in those days, too occupied with the immediate problems of a person who had just lost the only consistent presence in his life and still needed to eat and sleep and exist in the world. He had filed the grief away in the place where he put things that he could not address in the moment. Standing in the green room on Park Avenue, reading 3 lines on cream paper, he felt something in that place shift. He closed his eyes. 3 seconds. To remember why you are playing and for whom. He opened his eyes and walked out onto the stage. What happened in the next 2 hours? The music, the room, the particular quality of attention that settled over 200 people when something real is being offered to them belongs in the category of things that are harder to describe than to feel. What Nolan knew was that he played the way his grandmother had taught him to play. Like it was a conversation he was having with something larger than himself, and he was not afraid to mean every word. Afterward, Walter Bream found him near the stage door. I'm putting forward your name for the Foundation's Emerging Artist Program, Bream said. Formal audition, panel review, standard process. No guarantees, I understand, Nolan said. You should also know, Bream said, that I called a colleague of mine at the Juilliard faculty this week. He was curious about you after I described the Whitfield dinner. He would like to arrange an informal meeting. Nolan held the case strap in both hands. He said, I'll be in touch, and this time when he said it. There was no space in the words for anything other than the plain truth of them. He found Harriet near the back of the room, still in her work clothes, because she had not thought to bring anything else, holding a glass of sparkling water and looking at the program as though she was checking her own work. He stood next to her. She did not say anything right away. She would have loved this room, Harriet said finally. She would have found the acoustics disappointing, Nolan said. She always did in hotel ballrooms. Harriet made a sound that was almost a laugh. She was right. They stood there for a moment in the noise and the good light. On the program in Harriet's hand, under the ensemble list, under the biography, 3 lines in small clean type. Loretta Webb, 1944 to 2022. First violinist, Harlem Chamber Orchestra. Grandmother and teacher of Nolan Webb. The room she had never been allowed into had her name in it now. He stood there and he let that be true. Some things take a long time to arrive. The ones worth waiting for tend to.